This question is very obvious and simple. Smash the like button if you've noticed that all Elite Wrestling has zero big men that are taken seriously as threats. And let's wait and see on how Bobby Lashley is booked moving forward, because I think it's low-key concerning that Bobby is now a tag team wrestler in All Elite Wrestling.
All right, so I just watched Dynamite. I watched Brian Cage versus Will Ospreay. And of course, Brian Cage lost. But the one thing that I noticed was Brian Cage is a monster on Collision. He's a monster in Ring of Honor. He's a monster on Rampage, but not so much Dynamite. So it makes me think, Tony Khan, man, he truly does treat Collision like Sunday Night Heat. And here's why. Hardcore Holly, Al Snow, D'Lo Brown, Godfather, Steve Blackman, those guys were mega stars on Sunday Night Heat. But on Raw, SmackDown, they were job guys, right? That's how Tony Khan, man, treats big guys. On Collision, they are megastars. But on the big show, Dynamite, they are nothing more than jobbers. Brian Cage, he just won a fatal four-way match on Collision. Brian Cage, he just dominated Top Flight with Lance Archer on Collision. But how come those two men cannot get a win on Dynamite? People are wondering, how come Big Booty Timeless, Toni Storm, and Mariah May, how come they had that segment on Collision, but not so much on Dynamite? Because I heard that Con Man, he wants to be more hands-on with Collision. He wants Collision to be bigger. So I get it, but this don't make sense. Why is Brian Cage and Lance Archer and Powerhouse Hobbs, Big Cass, how come those men are losers on Dynamite, but not so much on Collision? Right, so you cannot convince me that you are trying to make Collision bigger and you are trying to be more hands-on by giving us moments that should be on Dynamite. But your top stars on Collision are jobbers on Dynamite. That makes no sense. You see, this is what Tony Khan does. He treats big guys like boxers. Usually, the reason why a boxer's record is so big, is so inflated, because they face jobbers. Their first 20 fights, they face jobbers to make their record look good. And then once they face a real boxer, they get their ass whooped because they were facing tomato cans during their first 20 fights. But it makes the fight look good when your jobber opponent is like fucking undefeated. When he has like maybe 25 wins and maybe 2 losses, it makes them look good. So this is what Tony Khan does to big guys. On Collision, he books them against jobbers. Then, once they get to the big show, which is Dynamite, they lose. But he fools you. He makes you think that he is giving Big Cass a push. Lance Archer, Brian Cage, Powerhouse Hobbs. He makes you think he is giving them a push if they have decisive wins on Ring of Honor, Rampage, Collision. So, it makes the match look more credible. For example, Dean Ambrose versus Powerhouse Hobbs. Before that match, Hobbs was getting wins on Collision, but those wins were against enhancement talent. So you are trying to inflate his record so he can look credible against Dean Ambrose by giving Powerhouse Hobbs a fake-ass winning streak to make him look good and credible against a Dean Ambrose for the World Heavyweight Championship. But we all knew he was going to lose. This is what Tony Khan does to all his big guys on the D-list shows, right? Ring of Honor, D-list. Collision, D-list. Rampage, F-list. Those weak-ass shows, of course, big guys, they dominate. They always beat job guys to inflate their record. Like, every time they show Brian Cage's record on TV, I'm like, hold on. Where did Brian Cage get that win-loss record? Because every time I see him, he loses. Oh, right. He wins tons of jobber matches on Collision and Rampage and Ring of Honor, right? We don't see it. So you can make the argument that Tony Khan, he books all elite fake pro wrestling like boxing, where all the big guys that he wants to job out, first, he gives them a great wins-loss record. He does that so they can look good against a top small man like a Omega, Will Ospreay, guys like that at Hook. Now, I'm not saying that Omega is a small man. I'm not saying Ospreay is a small man, but those guys are small compared to a Brian Cage, a Hobbs, a Big Cass, Lance Archer. Those men are small. But you can't make all your matches predictable, man. It's like, that's bad, awful, trash booking. Brian Cage versus Kenny Omega. Who do you think is going to win that match? What was the point of that match? We all knew Brian Cage was going to lose, but if you watch Collision, it will shock you that Brian Cage actually wins matches. He's dominant on Collision. But on Dynamite, he's a jobber to the stars, just like all big men are. Okay, is Tony Khan, man, giving Powerhouse Hobbs a push? I'm gonna say no. There's a difference between being pushed versus getting featured more every week. Powerhouse Hobbs, he is getting featured. He is not getting pushed. There's a huge difference. There was no point of booking Powerhouse Hobbs against Dean Ambrose for the world title. That is not being pushed, especially how Powerhouse Hobbs lost against Dean Ambrose. That causes more harm than good. You can have Powerhouse Hobbs go on a winning streak on Dynamite, Collision, etc., without having him face Dean Ambrose for the world title. That made no sense. Powerhouse Hobbs, he just came back. So what was the point of him challenging Dean Ambrose for the world title? He was not going to win. That's not being pushed. That's called being featured. Tony Khan, he is trying to treat Collision like SmackDown, but you are doing a bad job, because smart guys like me, I know what you are doing. You treat big guys on Collision like they are Hardcore Holly, Al Snow, Godfather, Val Venus, Steve Blackman, Too Cold Scorpio, jobbers who were on Sunday Night Heat. But on the big stage, Raw, SmackDown, they never won big time matches. But on Sunday Night Heat, they were mega stars. That's what Brian Cage is. Powerhouse Hobbs, Big Cass, Lance Archer. That's what those guys are on the weaker shows. They are top guys. Listen, you need at least one big guy. That's a top guy. Every company has that. TNA, NXT, Raw, SmackDown. Every company, every show has at least one dominant big guy. Okay, let's talk about SmackDown. They got Jacob Fatu. They got Braun Strowman. Now they got Damian Priest. They have dominant big men. All right, let's talk about Raw. Even they have dominant big men. They got Sheamus. They got Braun Breaker. They got the Viking Raiders. They got dominant big guys on that show. They got Karrion Kross. Every show, if you noticed, in the World Wrestling Federation, they got dominant big men everywhere. Let's talk about NXT. They go from Ethan Page to Trick Williams to Oba Femi as their World Heavyweight Champions. That's a pattern. Shawn Michaels, he likes pushing big guys. I forgot to mention Gunther the Ringerel. He's the current World Heavyweight Champion. So Triple H, he has dominant big men everywhere. I'm not saying your whole roster needs to have a whole bunch of dominant big guys, but you need to have at least one dominant presence. They can't be jobbers, or your numbers will go down. Your ratings will go down. People will treat your show like a joke. If I'm a casual, why am I seeing all these small men beating big giants like a Big Cass? Why are we seeing Hook choke out Big Cass? Every era of the World Wrestling Federation, they always had at least one dominant big man or more. Who else? Fucking Giant Gonzalez, Kane, Taker, Hogan, Andre the Giant, One Man Gang, the Great Khali. They have had multiple dominant big men. Who else? Fucking Diesel, Scott Hall. Those men were big guys. I forgot to mention the Big Show. Man, just imagine if the Big Show was young and in his prime in all elite wrestling. My God, he would be Big Cass. A lot of people don't bring that up. Yes, Big Show is a legend, but let's go backwards. What if a prime Paul White, what if a prime Giant, a prime Big Show was in all elite wrestling? He would be Big Cass. He would be Lance Archer. Like I said, you gotta put some respect on the name of Vince McMahon, because he made Big Show a megastar. He made Big Show a future Hall of Famer. Because what if a prime Big Show was on Dynamite? He would get beaten by Omega, Hook, Ospreay, etc. He would get beaten by all of Tony Khan Man's favorite average size small men. I forgot to mention Bronson Reed. Before Bronson Reed got injured, he was being pushed as a dominant force by Triple H. He was being pushed as a modern day Bam Bam Bigelow. That's how hard Triple H was pushing Bronson Reed. Even back in OVW, Jim Cornette was booking Dave Batista like he was Goldberg. Nobody could beat Dave Batista back in OVW, right? That's called booking one-on-one. You need at least one dominant big man on your roster. You can't have zero. You need at least two or one, but you can't have zero. You cannot name me not one dominant big man. That's a main eventer in all Elite Wrestling. Hell, they have no big men main eventers on that roster. Whose fault is that? That's Tony Khan Man's fault.